This is not a conscious personality. This is like a semi-conscious, very disordered personality. And what has come to my attention from reading Jung about this and from my own experiences with the mystery school is that there's a deep way in which the story of the incarnation, death, resurrection, Pentecost of Jesus is a story of an unconscious God becoming conscious by incarnating as a human and experiencing the pain of his own creation.
Wow. The episode you are about to experience is one of my all-time favorites I have done so far on Plenty. It is with Carolyn Lovewell, formerly Carolyn Elliott, the author of Existential Kink, which is one of the top books that has changed my life. I read it in like 30 seconds, and I have told everyone about it ever since. Her work around alchemizing shadow is absolutely groundbreaking. She's a PhD in psychology. She is an expert in Jungian philosophy, and she is so freaking smart and revolutionary. So today we talk about how to alchemize the things that we are unconsciously attracting, including scarcity and rejection. And if you are offended by me saying that you are unconsciously attracting things that you don't want, just listen into the episode and see what you think. I think she is one of the most interesting people I have ever talked to, and I'm so excited for you to hear this episode. Enjoy. Welcome to Plenty. I'm your host, Kate Northrup, and together we are going on a journey to help you have an incredible relationship with money, time, and energy, and to have abundance on every possible level. Every week, we're going to dive in with experts and insights to help you unlock a life of plenty. Let's go fill our cups.
Please note that the opinions and perspectives of the guests on the Plenty podcast are not necessarily reflective of the opinions and perspectives of Kate Northrup or anyone who works within the Kate Northrup brand.
Carolyn, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Kate.
Okay, so I heard about Existential Kink from now a dear friend who was at the time a client in my mastermind, and she just like mentioned it offhand, and I sort of flagged it, and I ordered your book, and then literally, I think 3 years later, I finally pulled it off the shelf. I'm like this, like I order books and then just at the right time, they just kind of talk to me from the shelf. So I pulled it out. I read it in like a week, and I think, brought it into nearly every conversation that I've had, at least like the deep ones, ever since. And so just to begin with, I would love for you to describe what existential kink is. And then I would like to share an example of how I've been using it in my life.
Absolutely. Thank you. Yes. So existential kink is basically this idea that we as humans universally have unconscious attractions to things that are not good. So we have attraction to dark, painful, scary things because our souls are whole. Our souls, and we can get into the metaphysics of this, but our souls are reflections, are microcosms of the macrocosm. And they're interested in the whole range of human experience, not just the good part that our ego is interested in. So existential kink is the idea that we can make these unconscious desires conscious by giving them lots of love, lots of approval, actually deep somatic, even erotic embrace in our bodies with practice. And that when we do this, we sort of take away the actual creative power that those desires have when they are unconscious. So people have all sorts of unconscious, I had all sorts of, well, I'll just start by talking in the first person.
Great.
All sorts of unconscious desires for things like scarcity, rejection, those were the two big ones. And gradually, as I made them conscious and really just enjoyed them deliberately and consciously, they stopped having the magnetizing, attracting power that they did as long as they were unconscious. So, there's this famous quote from Carl Jung, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will rule your life and you will call it fate. And boy, oh boy, is that true in my experience. So existential kink is sort of a very rapid, cutting-edge method of shadow integration, of integrating the unconscious mind into the conscious mind. And it can create very dramatic, deep shifts in people very, very fast. So yeah, that's the quick definition of it. I could go on and on.
So good.
Yeah.
So the way that I've been explaining it to people is what you said, which is having is evidence of wanting.
Yes.
So if something's coming up in our life, it's not random, right? Because we all have different issues, right? They're as varied as there are humans. Of course, there are themes. But like, so if it's showing up, it means it's for you in some way. And you have, I do want to know though, what is the difference between your concept of existential kink and having as evidence of wanting and the law of attraction? Like, what are the similarities and differences?
Oh, this is one. I love that you asked this question because they are precisely the same. So the thing is that the law of attraction, as it's usually taught, just doesn't put enough emphasis on the unconscious mind and the shadow. So actually, when I came up with the idea for existential kink, I was in graduate school, or I'd just come out of graduate school. I was really broke. I was living on couches and dumpster diving to survive, basically. And but I was really familiar. I'd read all sorts of psychoanalytic theory. I knew that there was an unconscious mind. I knew that some desires were unconscious. And I was trying to make my life better. So I was reading a lot of law of attraction stuff. And they were talking about how, you attract what you desire. And I remember I was standing in line one freezing December morning at the food bank. And I was like, does some part of me desire this? And I was like, well, maybe an unconscious part of me does. And so I began to just be really gently curious about that. So it's interesting because a lot, how do I say this? A lot of law of attraction teachings will tell you just ignore stuff you don't want, just always focus on the positive. For me, that just never worked. I've just always been a sort of goth, deep, I walk in cemeteries a lot. I'm always really focused on the darker side of life. And I think a lot of people are.
Are you a Scorpio?
I have Pluto in Scorpio. I have Mars in Scorpio conjunct in the 7th house.
What's your rising?
My rising is Taurus. I could talk astrology all day,
I
too.
know, we could go. Anyway, I'm just curious.
Yeah.
And what do you have in the 8th house?
In the 8th house, I have a Sagittarius stellium. So I have Venus cojoined with Uranus on the south node with Jupiter in there too. So,
Jupiter in the 8th house.
Yes.
Okay, there you go.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So this big, expansive, happy view on deep, dark subjects.
Yeah, like
is basically,
let's fertilize the shadow.
Yes.
Look at you living your dharma.
It's true. It's very true.
Cool.
Thank you. Yeah, so existential kink is basically a way of working with the deep, dark side of the law of attraction, because the idea, so the law of attraction is completely correct in that, our vibration, the mode that we're vibing on, will bring to us our experiences. Yeah. And the thing is most of us, especially repeating negative patterns. So I don't usually talk with, freak accidents. I'm not so much factoring in, but, oftentimes people will have repeating patterns of getting into relationships that somehow it's different people, but they have the exact same tyrannical personality. Yeah. Or, I can't seem to make above a certain amount of money a month. All of these things, creative blocks, illnesses, things that keep repeating. So I just... so I found out that the law of attraction is true in this way, that there's this unconscious, almost, the name of the book is Existential Kink, because these desires can be kind of sadomasochistic. Yeah. And that's, an interesting facet of human nature is we have the ability to take pleasure in things that are not, not on the sunny side of life, not so good. Yeah. And the interesting thing is as long as we're ashamed about this, as long as we have any sense of guilt or blame or shame, those desires will remain in the unconscious, because it takes love, it takes approval to consciously associate something with my ego. So, and that can be very humbling. It can be, it usually is it's a little form of ego death. It can be very psychedelic, because the who I am, who I thought I was, for example, in this situation with, that I was talking about after I was graduated grad school and was living on couches and dumpster diving. And I was actually I was living in a community house connected to an orgasmic meditation practice. So I was living with like 10 roommates, and I was like 30 years old. I was like, wow, I really, I don't know what I'm doing. And yeah, I was like, what is even happening? And I had gotten curious. I was like, perhaps some part of me desires this situation. And, we were talking about...
Interesting. It's just so brilliant of you to think, perhaps some part of me may want this given that it's happening. I mean, that's a bold, courageous statement to make.
Thank you. Kate. Well, yeah, so in a way, I'm sort of like the biggest believer in law of attraction that somebody can find.
100%.
I really believe in it. And I'm really willing to look at the part of myself that's attracted to the dark things that I'm creating in my life. And so I found, and it takes a lot of relaxation, a lot of gentleness, a lot of humor. But I was one day, I was inquiring, I was doing the work of Byron Katie. And, you write down your judgments and then you turn them around. I was coaching and doing creativity coaching to make a living at the time. And I knew other coaches who were making like $1,000 an hour, which to me was like a mind-blowing amount of money. Yeah. And like I had grown up, Pittsburgh, that doesn't happen. But anyways, it does.
Totally.
So I was doing little, Byron Katie sheet on like, people should want to pay me $1,000 an hour for coaching. And I, with the Byron Katie process, you ask, is that true? Can I absolutely know that that's true? How do I react when I believe that thought? Who would I be without that thought? And then you turn it around to the opposite. So I turned it around to nobody should ever want to pay me anything for coaching. And I felt this whole zing through my body. I was like, oh my gosh, that's so hot. Wow. And then I was like, Carolyn, obviously that's why nobody wants to pay you for coaching, because you're super turned on by them not wanting to pay you for coaching. And I was like, I was just
whoa.
So it was a very deep, somatic, bodily, undeniable realization. And I knew, that truth has a sensational quality to it, right?
It does.
When we tell somebody we love them for the first time and we say, I love you, our cheeks flush, our hearts beat. I knew it was the truth, that I really thought it was so hot for nobody to want to pay me. And so I spent time I was like, okay, well, this is how I'm wired, apparently. I don't know how to change this, so I'm just going to approve of it. I'm just going to set time aside each day to tell the part of myself that's really attracted to this, I love you. Your desire for this situation is just as worthy as my desire for tasty food and flowers and sunshine. You're worthy too, and I'm going to celebrate. Your desire is being fulfilled.
Totally.
I'm going to get on your side and I'm going to cheerlead for you. I'm going to be happy that you're getting what you want. So I gradually was able to do that. And Kate, it was so deep, I started having these like full body, like electrical, orgasmic experiences. And sometimes it would just be laughter and sometimes it would be crying. But like I said, it was sort of like a psychedelic ego death, almost like a little ayahuasca without ayahuasca. Totally. Like I came to see that who I thought I was not who I was. I was actually a deeply fulfilled person. I was not a pathetic, lacking person. And so it was so dramatic. And so it shifted my whole identity. And I think that that's one of the most potent things that EK does, is it shifts at the identity level. And I've learned a lot about identity level shifts from my mentor, Dr. Robert, which is once we shift at the identity level, the thoughts, the feelings, the actions, the behaviors, everything sort of beneath that level of identity automatically changes. Yeah. And so the shift was very dramatic for me once I started experiencing myself as a fulfilled person who was getting exactly what she wanted, which was a negative bank account, which was like a huge amount of student loan debt, which was like embarrassment about not being able to pay my like $100 of rent a month. Yeah. And as my identity shifted and I began to experience myself as fulfilled, it was like these blinders I had on opened up. And I saw all sorts of opportunities and, I was like, oh, I could create an email list and make offers to my email list. And I could have always done that before.
Yes.
That there was no hard brick walls, stuff, but there were, just walls in my own mind of seeing myself as unworthy and uncool and pathetic and everything. But anyways, I was like, I'm awesome and I'm going to make offers. And I went from making like $1,000 a month to $10,000 a month, just like that. And I was like, well, sayonara, everybody. I'm going to Bali. So I just
Naturally.
Yeah, and I started teaching. I was teaching courses on writing and courses on magic, and I was like, well, this is the most potent form of magic I know. So I taught my clients to do it, and I was quite surprised because I thought it was such a a weird, esoteric, freaky, sadomasochistic thing, but everybody loved it when I taught it to them, and everybody had great, massive shifts like I had also had, and I was like, whoa, this is something that the world must know. And I was actually, anyways, I could go on and on about the ways that Existential Kink opened up my life and opened up other people's lives, but maybe I'll hand it back to you.
I could just listen to you talk about this forever. Okay, so I want to share so I read your book, and I just knew so deeply it was true, at least for me. Mm-hmm. And I really love to play in the sunshine. Like I don't know, like opposite you, but one of my life lessons is to learn to be able to face shadow. Mm-hmm. Like I'm not going to go for a walk in the cemetery. Mm-hmm. I'm way more likely to spiritually bypass and pretend everything is completely fine and never want to talk about the darkness. Although that's obviously not true because I invited you here. But like that's like past version. But I'm reading this book and I was like, oh my God, because the ability to take anything we're experiencing in our life that we say we quote unquote do not want and immediately put ourselves in our point of power, which is approval, to be able to shift something, like the power and agency in that is basically intoxicating, because then there's nothing we can't change. There's nothing we can't work with. There's nothing that's not material. And I am pretty obsessed with regenerative agriculture. And so one of the things I was thinking about as I was reading your book is compost. And the way in which the quote unquote waste is the fertilizer for all the new growth. And so therefore there is no such thing as something we don't want. There is no such thing, right? The shadow is the new birth. The shadow is the fertilizer. Like all the light comes from the shadow. It cannot exist without the other one. So anyway, I was having this situation when I was reading your book. And it was a repeat thing, right? So you said this works really well when you find yourself in the same freaking situation and you're like, really? And it was a situation with my husband, Mike, and he's also my business partner. And I won't get into the details to spare the people involved, but he would talk about this. So he had said something to someone I love that had put them off. And this has been going on for 13 years of our relationship, where like he says something or does something because he's very direct and it can be abrupt. And it's very medicinal for me. But as like I come from a very waspy family, we don't like, say real things in real time, but we're working on it. So that happened. And then that person came to me about it, which is again, the repeat situation. And then I went to him about it. And he was once again like, why will you not have people just address me directly? Like you got to get out of the middle. And I was feeling like, why am I here again? Like, how is it that 13 years later, I'm still in the middle, like trying to protect people from my husband in this unconscious way? Like, this is really not healthy. I've done therapy sessions about this. Like, what the fuck? So I have been sitting in the sauna a lot lately. I just like really feel like I need to just cook my body. And I was sick a lot last year, and like the sauna has just helped so much. So my new thing is I do my existential kink meditation in the sauna, because I'm like, we're in here burning stuff anyway.
Oh, it's an excellent alchemical.
Put it, right? I'm like, we'll put it all in the cauldron. So I go in there and I'm like, okay, body. What is it? Like, I just brought to mind this situation with my husband, like being married to someone who puts off other people with the way he can be, and then they come to me. And then I feel annoyed about it, and I feel victimized about it, and I feel at odds with him, and then I need to save these people and be the go-between. I'm like, okay, hi, hello. Like, clearly I'm creating this because I'm here. And so I just like sort of brought it to mind, and then I felt into the sensation of where I felt it in my body. And per your suggestion, I allowed myself to let that sensation kind of grow, and I just was present to the aliveness in it. And it was wild. It turned into, first of all, like, the inquiry was sort of like around secondary gain, like, right? Like, okay, what am I getting out of this? And what do I not get to be, or what do I get to be? But it combined with the somatic experience of like allowing myself to even feel all the way down, you know, into my pelvis, like the aliveness and the zing of it, I actually got really turned on and realized that there's a part of me that loves being married to the bad guy because A, it's kind of hot. And B, I get to be the good girl. And I actually like really freaking love being the good girl because then he gets to be bad and I get to be good. And I also get to get off on my superiority complex.
Oh, yes.
And it was just like, whoa. And I was like, you know, I go to this random LA Fitness to go to the sauna because it's the only one in my neighborhood. But if I had not been in a public place, like it would have been like this really, I mean, it already was, but I was like, whoa, the turn on is wild here at the LA Fitness sauna. And so I just wanted to say thank you, number one. And that's only one example. You know, I've used it on so many different things that come up. And even like, just feeling of, there was this feeling of limitation around a financial thing. And so what I wanted to dive into next, because my show is called Plenty, because I play in the field of money, tell me about your experience with, you already did, but I want to know more for people who are experiencing a repetition of scarcity, how that connects with existential kink, and then also how we consider that in the realm also of systemic issues and inequity.
Oh, yes.
Right? Which we're not individually creating, but we are collectively
Certainly.
creating. So what's that?
Oh, amazing set of questions, Kate. So the one thing that I always like to think about, so yeah, working with money and money scarcity has been like central to my own existential kink evolution, and it is for many people. And so the ego, in some ways, is built on scarcity. So if we think in a Jungian sense, if we think of this, the whole self or the whole soul, self with capital S, as a circle, the ego is like a little teeny island within this larger circle. And the ego has to define itself by what I am not, by what I don't have. Because, you know, think about egolessness is, like little babies are identified with everything. They think I am everything. I am mama, I am the sky, I am the blanket. You know, they don't make distinctions between like, this is what I'm not. So that's that sort of oceanic, complete identification with everything is the self with a capital S in a way. So our task as human beings, as I've come to understand it through my journey with Jungian psychology stuff, is we do have to define ourselves as egos. That's sort of, the journey of like childhood into adolescence and adulthood. And then, and in that process, we separate from the larger self with a capital S. But then we need spiritual connection, and we need, a deep relationshit's with what is larger than us. So then we need to start opening up our ego actually to reconnect with the self. So it's this question of this kind of ego-self axis. And for many people, how do I say, like challenging adverse circumstances can painful things. There's a lot of talk about trauma these days, can have their ego at a young age attach to seemingly negative things, and actually, like we've been talking about, get a sense of pleasure from them. And there's Freud had theories about it. He called it psychic masochism. He said that the libido, the sense of pleasure, the sense of life force, that basically that the psyche, the little ego, to protect itself, will find a way to get pleasure from adverse circumstances. So growing up, my parents didn't have a lot of money. They were always fighting about it. And I found a way to get pleasure from the drama, pleasure from the anxiety, pleasure from the sense of lack.
And do you think that, so my field of study for the last several years has been about the nervous system, which is obviously like underlying all of this. Do you think, and I want to hear the rest of your thought, but I also want to ask this question to like weave in. Do you think that that's because in our development, our nervous system basically gets the message energetically from the soup we're swimming in, this is what it means to be alive?
Yeah, this is what it means to be who I am. This is what it means to be part of this family.
Right, so it's not a conscious choice of we find a way to find it pleasurable. It's that literally like our development as a body is like, oh, this is the information available, so this must be what it means to be alive, and therefore this will be interconnected with my life force.
Yes, absolutely. Okay. Absolutely. Yes, exactly. So pleasure at an unconscious level. The system takes pleasure. Because it's part of being who I am.
The system takes pleasure. Okay, great. So there you are. You're in your childhood home, and your ego learns to take pleasure from scarcity because it's what the soup you were growing up in.
Yes. So this, so in Jungian terms, existential kink can be very individuating because it's basically saying, I'm going to become conscious of the soup that I grew up with, and I'm going to love it. And in order to love it, you actually have to get bigger than it. You actually have to expand, transcend it, really. So, and in existential kink, there's another individuating piece, is you're giving yourself permission to approve of things that the environment itself didn't approve of. So, my mother was never in approval of her bank account being empty, of, not knowing how she was going to pay bills. There was zero, she didn't have any approval for that. So deciding to give that approval was a deep individuation away from the collective upbringing. So yes, so the ego often attaches itself to some sense of scarcity. So scarcity of love, scarcity of money, scarcity of time, scarcity of creative expression, scarcity of health. And it can be in this very kind of tight knot. And that's like sort of what's classically known as being neurotic. Being anxious, being depressed is this sort of like knotted sense of self. So the orgasmic meditation practice that I was doing at the time, and really helped open up the flow of erotic life force energy in my body. So I'm sadly that practice isn't as available right now as it used to be due to a number of factors.
Yeah. But we can all, Nicole Daedon's book, Slow Sex, and then also Tim Ferriss wrote about it in his book, The 4-Hour Body, the 15-minute orgasm. So like the steps are out there.
The steps are out there. So you can have somebody stroke you, or you can stroke yourself slowly and gently and build up that capacity and sensitivity to feeling.
Which rewires your nervous system.
Absolutely.
Yeah. To be able to increase your capacity for pleasure of all kinds.
Absolutely. Yeah. So that's this idea of the having this level.
So does that like melt the edges of that ego self?
It does start to, because if you think about it as, one of the things that the ego is this habitual, it has a certain homeostasis. So it rejects things that are outside of its usual range of sensation. And those can be bad things. And those can be very, very good things. So, when I was in that sort of deep contracted state that I was in the olden days, if I was invited onto a beautiful podcast talk show like this, if I had received, somebody wanted to hire me for, $10,000 worth of coaching, it would have it would have like freaked me out. I would not have been able to deal. There was no way that I would have just been able to like meet that and receive that.
Yeah.
So it's Existential Kink offers, a deep way of gently practicing how much sensation can I be conscious with? Can I be present with? Can I associate with my ego identity and receive as, okay, this is safe, this is good, I can respond to this, I can handle this, as opposed to like, oh, scary.
Yeah, scary threat beyond what I've ever experienced, beyond what anyone in my lineage has ever experienced or my community, like therefore threat to my survival.
Exactly.
Okay, so then tell me about the systemic part. How is it that we collectively create collective scarcity for particular groups of people, and how can we work with that on an individual and collective level to possibly lift the limitations of scarcity for whole groups?
Beautiful, beautiful. So the way that I see it, so I hear what you're saying. It's like, obviously, some groups of people have much less material resources, and it seems like some people have much more.
Yeah.
But there's a way in which our collective, our society as it's currently structured, the people with tons of material resources are also deeply afflicted by scarcity consciousness. Scarcity of, I have to use violence and manipulation and all sorts of, propaganda and media control to hold on to what I have. I have to, it's a spiritual scarcity. So I don't think, so the way that I see it is the current structures that we have are the current product of the having a collective unconscious rather than having a collective consciousness. So for me, I'm very optimistic about humanity, and that optimism comes from this belief that, as I have personally experienced, that the unconscious can be made conscious. And when that happens, there is a huge reorganization and new possibilities for effortless plenty for abundance are just realized. And I think, as many spiritually awake, aware, loving people are sensitive to, it's like we don't have to organize our society in this current, rather restrictive way that's organized. There is enough for everyone. We could, if we put our minds to it, we absolutely could find energy and food and, resources for absolutely everybody, but we just don't because of these old patterns. So I'm, a deep part of my passion, what I'm really into is I call it spreading alchemical literacy, which is literacy about how to make the unconscious conscious. So if you think about it, for thousands of years, the art of reading and writing was considered something that only very special people could do, kings and priests.
Yes, isn't that
It
wild?
was
Like,
magic.
I forget that. And I think we all forget
We
that.
forget that because it was...
When did it come about that, I am aware that not everyone can read and
Right.
write in current times. But do you know-ish when it came about that we moved the needle where it was more common to read and write than not common?
Well, so the most giant shift, I think, came with the invention of the printing press.
Sure.
And
Good old Gutenberg.
yeah, and industrialization. And it was discovered that, so at one point, though, it was thought that only the most special, the most intelligent people could learn to read and write, and that it would be pointless to try to teach just anybody. And then we gradually realized that, pretty much everybody can learn to read and write. And it became very widespread, and there was a massive change when literacy became widespread. So likewise, up until this point, the idea has been that only very special people, only the most enlightened, most wonderful people can make the unconscious conscious and achieve, what we would call enlightenment or the great work or the alchemical marriage. The alchemical marriage is the union of the conscious and the unconscious minds, the sun and the moon, the gold and the silver.
The feminine
And the masculine. Absolutely. And our culture, especially the Western culture, has had this absolutely schizophrenic divide between the masculine and the feminine, and this deep devaluation of feminine embodied wisdom and this everything has to be this very left brain science-y stuff, right? So I think we've gotten to the point where we've pushed that division so far that the only place to go now, so that's, in alchemy, that's a separation, that's a solve. There's been this very intense solve, very intense devaluation of the feminine, very intense exaltation of the masculine mind. The only place for them to come now is back together. And that back together, I believe, will be an enormous, I feel like it's very close on the horizon. And I could talk about the astrological reasons for that and other things. But
Yeah.
yeah.
Let's do that.
Let's do it. Well, I feel, so there's a famous configuration that's going to happen in 2026. I think it's called the Barbeau basket, which is a specific configuration of outer planets that's supposed to be very benevolent, very, evolutionary. And likewise, are you familiar with human design stuff? Yeah. So the human design folks have a prophecy about 2027 being a time when the energies are going to shift such that basically a new kind of humanity starts to come into being, and that the solar plexus, the central internal authority that people have, is going to be much more emphasized as opposed to like the top-down external hierarchical authority. And it's true in my experience, and it's true in I think, for everybody that I see who puts a lot of attention into doing inner work and healing work, they come to have that transition. They come to rely more on their own internal intuition rather than, giving it up to authorities all the time. And I think that is the arc of evolution that humanity is going to make into a collective consciousness. And sometimes when I say collective consciousness, I think people imagine that I'm talking about something like the Borg or something like a sort of mechanical hive mind that devours people. And that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about where everybody, so if we think about slow myself down, where everybody has made significant inroads into making the unconscious conscious. Now, you can't make the unconscious totally conscious because it's the mystery. It's, it's God. It's like,
right. Yeah.
There's always going to be mystery, but there's so much stuff that can be made conscious that hasn't been. So once we start making that conscious, when we arrive into the collective consciousness mode, what that means is that everybody is so actually attuned to their individuality, so actually attuned to their unique purpose, their unique guiding star. There's this quote I love, every man and woman is a star, from Aleister Crowley. Every man and woman is a star. So everybody's attuned to their own star, and each star is perfectly in its orbit. So we'll be moving in our perfect orbit according to really the deep laws of our own being, rather than some sort of externalized conditioning that we've received from school or family. And we'll be sort of attuned to the cosmic dance in a really deep, creative, beautiful way. So that's what I see as on the horizon for us.
When you're talking, I'm getting this visual of, I think one of the paths of our time that you and I are walking in our own way is that deep dive into, like you said, our own unconscious, our own shadow, our own intuition, what is uniquely ours to bring. And in so doing, when we focus less on the external powers, the victimization of like that out there is making it so that this in here, like looking outside ourselves for power, for approval, for love, for abundance, right? All those things. Like the deeper we dive inside, it's almost as though then going all the way in then brings us all the way out to that place in which we are all unity consciousness, to God.
Absolutely, yes. And I love that you mentioned that about victimization, because if there's any, I would say that is the general shadow that everybody suffers with, that we as a collective suffer with. And it's interesting because it's like people with tons of material resources still manage to feel victimized by, whatever, the political situation or their people.
Taxes, whatever.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. People with very little resources can also feel victimized, obviously. And so that attachment, maybe even more so than talking about scarcity, that attachment to feeling victimized by an external fate, by some unfathomable thing that's attacking us from the outside, I think is the human shadow, which is something that I've been thinking a lot about lately because you said it was cool if I talked about far out, cutting edge things. So
bring it on.
yeah. So I wrote this book about 5 years ago. And since then, what grew out of it is, well, we have a whole Existential Kink coach training program, which is really awesome. And we also have a mystery school. So the mystery school is connected. It's in the tradition of the mystery schools of antiquity. So the Temple at Eleusis, the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, extending into the 19th century. And anyways, it's a deep esoteric lineage that has to do with this idea of the dead and reborn God. So we see that in, the stories about Dionysus, the stories about Osiris. There's stories...
Also Jesus,
right. Very much.
Yeah.
And specifically, I've been thinking a lot about esoteric Christianity lately and this making sense of the Old Testament. And I've been reading Answer to Job by Carl Jung, which I highly recommend to anybody. But Jung is pointing out, and how do I say it? So talking about victimization. This all ties together, I promise.
This is awesome. I'm hanging on every word.
Okay. So if you look at the Old Testament and Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh in the Old Testament, the God of the Old Testament, in some sense, he's giving laws and he's giving commands, but he's also doing things like commanding genocide. Go kill all of those women and children. You better praise me all the time. I'm a jealous God. If I catch you worshiping another God, I'm going to kill you. It's scary. He's like a scary kind of psychopath, schizophrenic. We would say this is not a conscious personality. This is like a semi-conscious, very disordered personality. Yeah. And what has come to my attention from reading Jung about this and from my own experiences with the mystery school is that there's a deep way in which the story of the incarnation, death, resurrection, Pentecost of Jesus is a story of an unconscious God becoming conscious by incarnating as a human and experiencing the pain of his own creation. So if you think about creation, unconscious creation, and that's actually Kabbalistically, Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh represents this process of natural creation that's happening all the time, this nature red in tooth and claw. There's animals that eat their own babies. There's the scary stuff out there, like the natural world is
the praying mantis who eats her lover after being inseminated.
Precisely. And so what I've started to understand is that there's this deep mystery, I think, that God needs humans or human-like consciousness to become conscious, rather than there being a deliberate conscious creator God starting out. For me, it's starting to feel like, there's just unconscious nature creating and happening and beginning to interact with humans. There's this deep interaction we've had with the divine, but that it doesn't become clear. The love of the divine becomes clear through incarnation and sacrifice. So I've been getting my existential kink practice has evolved to really meditating a lot on the crucifixion and really meditating a lot on, the creator experiencing the consequences of his own creation. Like, I've created these beings and they're torturing me and they're killing me. And I love them, and I forgive them, and
I don't know. I mean, I don't mean to be pithy, but there's something about what you're describing that just really reminds me of motherhood.
Mm-hmm. Oh yes, absolutely, 1,000%. I've created these beings, and now they're torturing me.
I wouldn't say my children are trying to kill me, but there have been moments where it's like, what is happening? Like. What? This is torture.
This is torture.
It's a lot of like absolute bliss, but sometimes it's torture.
Absolutely.
And I'm like, you freaking came out of me.
You came out of me. And they're reflecting back to us things that were, for me at least, that were unconscious in myself, my little 5-year-old daughter. And they become conscious. So now I have this theory of like, well, that's what the story of the Bible is a lot about. It's like this creator God created us and was totally surprised that we turned out to be naughty. And to have all of these qualities that he himself, just to speak in that he himself has, that he didn't know that he had. And so he starts by, I'm going to punish you, I'm going to threaten you. And then, I have to become you to understand you. I have to experience this. I have to experience the whole thing. And so I think these days, I think a lot about Jesus as the ultimate existential kink symbol because he let himself be totally, crucified by life, by creation.
Yeah.
And then he descended into the deepest parts of hell, and then he bounced right back.
Boom, the resurrection.
Yeah, the resurrection power, the deep magic.
That is fascinating. What do you think about Mary Magdalene's role in his resurrection around that time? Just because you obviously are someone who's like reading and researching.
Yes.
I just wanna know.
Yes, I love this question. So I think that Mary Magdalene had a deep part to play. I mean, my own pet theory from my research is that she was a tantric partner of Jesus. And actually,
I agree.
Yes.
Yes. As a non-religious scholar myself.
Yeah. I think there's plenty that would substantiate that. I think Jesus was doing sort of standard tantric miracles in a way, things that one
standard tantric miracles. It's a great title for a book.
Yes, right? It's things that any Mahasiddha knows how to do is turn water into wine, walk on water. Yeah. But when I think about Mary Magdalene, actually, there's this an amazing. So if we look at the archetype of the whore in the Bible as a whole, we see that Jesus' lineage is actually all of these fallen women, all of these women who were, not behaving the way that they were supposed to, right down to his mom who, she's pregnant by God, but that just means she's mysteriously pregnant and she's unmarried and she's young, she's not supposed to be pregnant.
Right.
And that he probably grew up with the stigma of, being a bastard son of a whore. So this idea of Mary Magdalene as a fallen woman, as one of his closest disciples, as a woman who she was actually the whole of Christianity for a little minute because she was the one who first experienced the visitation of the resurrected Christ. So she was the whole carrier of the gospel in a deep way. And then what I've been really focused on a lot lately, and what Jung focuses on, interestingly, both in his book Aeon and Answer to Job, is the book of Revelation. And in the book of Revelation, there's 3 feminine figures, and conventional Christianity usually is not willing to connect these figures. There's a figure called the Queen of Heaven, who's clothed with the sun, and she's wearing the moon under her feet, and she's pregnant, and she's running into the wilderness in labor, trying to give birth to a male child, and the child is eaten by the great beast and taken up into heaven. So that seems analogous to the Virgin Mary story. Then there's the whore of Babylon, who is also in the wilderness, but now she's riding the great beast, and she's in this beautiful scarlet and purple outfit, and she's drinking blood that is full of, she's drinking from a cup that's full of the wine of her fornication with the kings of the earth, and it's full of the blood of Jesus. It's full of the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. It's full of the saints. It's the Holy Grail. So she's drinking from the Holy Grail, riding the great beast, implying that she's mastered the beast in a way. And then the final feminine figure is the New Jerusalem, the bride of Christ, who descends from the sky and is marrying Christ, marrying Jesus. So mother, whore, and bride. And I think it's pretty plain that they're all versions of the same figure, the same being who is in a very profound way sort of exorcised from conventional Christianity. The only image of that conventional Christianity gives us is this Virgin Mary, and she's usually quite sad. So she's a sad virgin. But also womp womp, which, just sort of just cuts out this image of happy, feminine, fulfilled, delighted sexuality.
Right.
And the only image of that is Babylon. And there's these previous echoes in the Old Testament too. So anyways, I'm very interested in the way in which, usually also when conventional Christians talk about the whore of Babylon, it's as, she's some metaphor for empire or for, Rome or the evil Catholic Church. The Protestants like to say it's the evil Catholic Church. But they always sort of undercut this fact that she is drinking the Eucharistic blood, which means she's included in the communion, she's redeemed, she's full of grace. So I'm really interested in this image of the whore of Babylon drunk on the blood of her son, essentially Jesus, as a potent, scandalous, activating symbol that I think is ready to take has certainly taken me and a lot of folks that I've worked with in the mystery school into a much deeper experience of and revelation of the mysteries connected to Jesus, which have been, I think, really obscured by, so much shaming and so much distortion, just human distortion of the mystery of grace. So that's something that I think about a lot with existential kink. And I also think about Babylon as an amazing sort of patron saint of existential kink, and that she's taking in everything.
Accept all, reject none.
Except, yes.
Wait. I'm not a theologian in any respect. Is the book of Revelations one of the lost pieces, or is it like just in the Bible that you get?
It's part of the canonical Bible. It's the final book in the New Testament, and it's a series of visions that St. John had when he was exiled on the Isle of Patmos. So it's usually thought to be written by the same guy who wrote the Gospel of John and the letters of John.
Okay, but it's like if you go buy the Bible at the store, it's in there.
It's right there.
Got it. Thank you. Just checking.
And folks usually interpret it as, this is some sort of historical prediction, like the Antichrist is Donald Trump or the Antichrist is Barack Obama, or, but
depending on who you ask.
Yeah. But I think it's what it says it is, which is it says, the vision of St. John, the revelation of Jesus Christ. And I think what that means is that Jesus Christ is more than just Jesus of Nazareth. It's this whole mandala of characters surrounding. So including, King Herod and Pilate, including Judas, including Mother Mary and Mary Magdalene and the Whore of Babylon and the Great Beast. It's like, baby, it's all Christ.
It's all like coming back to wholeness.
Exactly.
Yeah. This is so fascinating. So you work with women entrepreneurs. I work with a lot of women entrepreneurs. What do you think is our invitation during this time as women out here creating prosperity for our families, in our lives, turning nothing into something?
Beautiful, beautiful. I love this question. So for me, I think that women entrepreneurs are on the cutting edge of this shadow integration revolution that is going to transforming humanity. And I think one of the most potent things about that, and when I work with women on their, blocks, connected to blocks that I had often, it's, there's a lot of social training about, especially if you're offering something, spiritual or emotional, like coaching or whatever, which many women are, there's this idea that it's wrong to make lots of money, right? It's greedy. How dare you? There's all these other people suffering. If you were compassionate, you'd be poor too. You'd be like Mother Teresa. Anyways.
Yeah.
And so for me, what I often focus on with women entrepreneurs and women, just seeking to grow and expand their creative expression on their financial lives is the way that I'm teaching it these days has to do with integrating the archetype of the vampire and the bodhisattva. So, bodhisattvas endlessly, altruistically give of themselves. And I think that's, in some ways, that's our default setting as women.
That's how we're conditioned.
Right? That's certainly how we're conditioned.
It hurts.
Endlessly giving. And then the image of a vampire, right, is somebody who's, an evil predator who's just taking and deceiving and enslaving.
And living off the life force of others.
Exactly. And so these are very opposite polar things. And it's like, well, how do we integrate those? How do we give permission to both the parts of ourselves that are, evil vampires and glorious bodhisattvas? And for me, what's been really alive lately is the way in which the Eucharistic blood and living on that blood and living on that mystery.
Hello. Yeah, the sacrament is vampirical.
Yes.
I mean, it blows my mind. Like the blood of Christ, like, whoa.
It's a deep,
and of course, this is as someone who I didn't grow up in the church. I was baptized Episcopalian, but more just like as a social thing.
But yeah, it's a deep vampiric shadow integration ritual. And
Wild.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's like, and I found that especially when I practice it in light of all of this beautiful stuff we've been talking about with Mary Magdalene and Babylon, it's, I'm drinking, I'm accepting the sort of deep poetry, the deep way in which we are all predator, we are all prey. God is sacrificing to God's self. constantly, and to take that in consciously and with honor and with reverence and with gratitude, and to participate in the way that I'm always being, like I said, I'm always being preyed upon. I'm always predating. There's no escape from it. Trying to escape from it always leads to some sort of like neuroticism or delusion. But really just being deeply embodied, present with this tremendous sacrifice that God is always doing. Innocence is always sacrificing itself into suffering the pain of creation. And to just consciously partake of that, it seems to, it's an expansive, integrative vibration. I guess I'll say that.
Can you tell me a recent experience that you had in your business or your life where you were able to use that metaphor to guide your decision-making?
Oh, wow. Let's see. To guide my decision-making.
Or to guide anything.
Yeah, to guide anything. Let me think. I mean, it pretty much inhabits absolutely everything, because when I'm always doing, I'm whoring the mysteries constantly.
Yeah,
that's
totally,
what I'm doing.
Right, absolutely.
So for me, it's my whole, so like, for example, so mystery schools, they were big in antiquity. After they were wiped out, every mystery school was very private, very, like the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. You had to be, referred, invited by somebody. It wasn't a publicly advertised thing. And if somebody went around and publicly advertised some sort of esoteric teaching, they were, they were kicked out. Yeah. They were considered, charlatans, and there were all of this, shame associated with that. And I guess I've just received a deep message from Vampire Babylon. Just tells me all the time, Carolyn, turn on the red light, like stand out on the street corner and hook out, on Instagram, on X, on YouTube, bring the people into the mysteries. The time is now. There's no time for coyness. It has to be prostituted like everything else. And, and to me, that's, so I'm perpetually being nurtured by that gnosis.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you for that.
Yes.
So beautiful. Yeah. This has just been such a great conversation. We went so many places I did not expect. I'm so excited to read your next book.
Oh, thank you.
Whenever that may come to pass.
I'm working on it.
I'm sure you are. I just really want to honor your depth of study and the honestly, like the intellectual prowess that you bring to this work, because there is just so much bullshit on the internet. And and that's great because it's part of the wholeness. And I really like your flavor. So thank you for coming today. Thank you for sharing so unabashedly all these turns and twists and inviting us into this mystery with you. It's really been so beautiful. Where can people come to find you, connect with you, learn about your certification, your mystery school?
Yes, wonderful. Thank you so much. It was such a joy today. So the primary website is theimmortalcollege.com. So that's the overarching name of our business. Is
so great. Theimmortalcollege.com. Of course, we'll put all the links in the show notes.
Yes. And I'm on X as, if you search Carolyn Lovewell on X, you'll find me. I have an Instagram account with plenty of posts, so that I'm not active right now. On the Immortal College, if they join the email list, that's the main thing. That's the way to get tuned into all of our offers. I have a fun little podcast that I do with my friend Layla called Sleepover with Carolyn and Layla. The mystery school is called Sleepover Mystery School. The Existential Kink training program is called Penetrate. So if you go to the Immortal College website, you should be able to join the waiting lists for Sleepover Mystery School, Penetrate, So there's so much that the Immortal College offers, and just join the email list is the main thing.
Love it. Yeah. Amazing. And I would say for everyone listening, get yourself a copy of Existential Kink and read it immediately, if not sooner. Thank you for being here. This has been such a pleasure. If you're seriously committed to healing your relationship with money, the place to start is my book, Money, a Love Story. It's available in print, it's available digitally, but it is also available on audio in a completely updated and revised edition. So no matter what your book consumption preferences, this is the place with exercises, healing strategies, and repatterning strategies to get started healing your relationship with money. Money, a Love Story is available wherever books are sold. Go get yourself a copy.